Hey guys, it's me, Play. Welcome back. In this video, I'll be teaching you how to create a weapon system. We'll cover the basics like shooting, reloading, and in later episodes we'll also look at how to add cool effects. Without wasting any more time, let's get started. So here you can see I have a scene with a basic first-person controller. As for my assets, I simply have a folder for external assets, one for materials, one for the scenes, and one for the scripts. In the scripts folder, I just have the scripts I'm currently using in the scene. First, create an empty game object under whatever object holds your camera. For me, that would be this camera holder right here. I'll call this new empty game object weapon holder and it will hold all of our weapons. Now add a gun model of your choice as a child of the weapon holder. I'll be using an asset I got from the asset store. Unpack the prefab if you need to. Then I'll create a parent for this AK-74 game object. You can do this by simply right clicking and selecting create empty parent. If you don't see this option, you might be on a different Unity version. Don't worry, just do it manually. Now I want to flip the weapon because it's backwards. So I'll select the gun's model object and rotate it by 180 degrees on the Y-axis. And also scale it up a bit. Now we want to set the pivot of the gun. First make sure you're in pivot mode, then go into orthographic view and position the gun's model object so that the back of it is at the center of the parent gun object. When you select the parent gun object, it should look like this. Next, position the weapon where you want it to be. You can use a reference image if you'd like, but I'm just gonna eyeball it. When I play the game, you can see you can look around with the weapon. Just to make things look a little nicer, I'll add some weapon sway to the gun. I'm not gonna cover how to do that in this video because I already made a video on it. I'm simply gonna use the code from that video. So create a new script called weapon sway and paste the code from the GitHub repo into the script. Make sure the name of the class and the name of the file are the same, otherwise you'll get an error. In the inspector, I'll set the variables to something like 8 for the smooth and 4 for the multiplier. That looks much better. Now it's time to actually create the weapon system. I'll be using scriptable objects as data holders for our different weapons. So first I'll create a folder for our scriptable objects. And under that I'll create a new script called gun data. This script will simply hold data for our different weapons, damage, fire rate, things like that. So delete the methods and instead of mono behavior inherit from scriptable object. Now we can start declaring fields. The first will be the name. As you can see, it's warning that the field hides the object name field. So to fix it, just add new before specifying the type. Then we need a float for damage and max distance. Now an int for the current ammo, the magazine size, and a float for the fire rate, which will be in rounds per minute. Another float for reload time, and finally a bool for reloading. And I'll add some headers to make them look nicer in the inspector. Finally, we want to be able to create an asset of this type from the asset window. To do that, simply add an attribute to the class. This attribute is called createAssetMenu, and it takes in file name and menu name. Adding slashes to the menu name will create submenus, so I'll call it gun and put it under a weapon menu. Now if we right click in the asset window and create something, you can see an option for weapon. And I'll create a new folder called gun objects and a subfolder for a gun, which is going to be an assault rifle. Create a new gun data scriptable object inside of it. I'll call it AR. Now you can assign values to the fields in the inspector. I'll call it assault rifle, set the damage to 22, max distance to 200, current ammo and mag capacity to 31, fire rate to 600 rounds per minute, and reload time to 1.5 seconds. As for the reloading bool, we actually don't want to change this from the inspector, so add the hide in inspector attribute to it. As you can see, it's gone. Now let's actually make our gun work. First I'm going to rename gun to assault rifle because that's the type of gun I'll be making. Then I'll create a new script called gun, and I'll add it to the assault rifle. In the script, we first need a reference to our gun data, so I'll create a new serialized field of gun data. Now in the inspector, simply drag the scriptable object we made into the field. Now let's create a method for when we want to shoot our gun. Make sure it's public, and inside this method I'll log something to the console for now. Now create a new script that will invoke an event when the player presses the shoot key. Create an action called shoot input, and since the player will only have one of this script attached, we can make the action static. In update, we check if the player pressed the left mouse button, and if they did, we can fire this event. This question mark thing is called a null conditional operator, and it will simply avoid a null reference exception in the case that there are no subscribers to this event. Back in the gun class, we want to subscribe to the event we just made. To do this, we refer to the event, then subscribe to it using +=. Then on the right side, we enter the method we want to be called when the action is fired. Now attach the player shoot script to the player, and if we play the game and left click, you can see that our message is being outputted in the console. Now we don't just want to print something to the console, instead we want to shoot array forward and detect what we hit. So delete the debug log. First we need to make sure our gun did not run out of ammo before we shoot. So create an if statement that checks if our current ammo is greater than 0. Then we also need to check if we're not reloading and if we can actually shoot this frame while respecting our gun's fire rate. So I'll create a bool method that returns true if we aren't reloading, and if our time since the last gunshot is greater than 1 over our gun's fire rate divided by 60. This is the time between shots. For example, let's say a gun's fire rate is 600 rounds per minute. To find the time between shots, we first find how many bullets fire in a second, and since there's 60 seconds in a minute, we divide 600 rounds per minute by 60 and we get 10. This 10 is how many rounds are being shot per second. Then to find out how much time passes between shots, we can divide 1 second by 10 rounds per second and we get 0.1 seconds, which is the time between shots. Back in the shoot method, we can check if we can shoot, and if we can, we do a physics raycast. For now, the origin will be this transform's position, the direction will be transformed forward, we'll out the hit info into a raycast hit, and the max distance will be gun data max distance. And if we hit something, we'll just log a message to the console for now. Afterwards, we reduce the current ammo, reset time since last shot, and for later we can call a method that will do things when we shoot. I'll name this callback onGunShot, and we can use it for effects later. Finally, we need to increment time since last shot by the delta time in update. And by the way, if you haven't already created time since last shot, create it. It's a float. Now we can create the muzzle. Back in the scene, create an empty game object under the assault rifle for the muzzle. Then position it in front of the gun. Back in the script, create a reference for it. And when we're firing a raycast, use the muzzle position instead of the transform position. Just to help visualize, I'll do a debug draw line to see what the ray looks like. Now make sure to reference the muzzle in the inspector, and when we play, we can see our ray in the scene. And when we shoot, it prints out the name of what we shot in the console. One quick thing I would like to mention is that in the editor, scriptable objects save their state in play mode. So if you run into a problem where you can't shoot, it might be because the scriptable object for your gun has 0 as its current ammo. Anyways, let's add reloading now. Create a method called startReload that will be called when the player presses the reload key. In this method, we reload if we aren't actually reloading. For actually reloading, we'll create a coroutine as we want to wait a certain amount of time before we're done reloading. So create a new IEnumerator method called reload. In this coroutine, we first set gun data reloading to true, yield return for the reload time, set the current ammo to the mag size, and finally set reloading back to false. And in the startReload method, we simply call this method if we aren't already reloading. Now to actually call this method, we need to create another event in the player shoot script similar to what we did for shooting. I'll call this new event reload input, and in update I'll check if the player presses the reload key, which I'll declare now, and I'll set it to R by default. Make sure to add the serialized field attribute to it so it shows up in the inspector. Back in update, if we press this key, invoke the event. In the gun script, we simply subscribe to the event just like we did for shooting. The method we call when this event fires is the startReload method. Back in the inspector, you can see on the right I have a scriptable object, and when I shoot, the current ammo decreases. When I press R, it starts reloading, and after the reload time, it finishes reloading and the current ammo is full again. Instead of logging the hit's transform name, we actually want to damage something. To achieve this, we'll be using interfaces. So I'll create a new folder for our interfaces, and I'll create a new C# script called iDamageable. Inside the script, remove any methods, change class to interface, and remove mono behavior as we don't want to implement it. All we need in here is a method called damage. In an interface, all methods are public and don't have implementation, just declaration. Now let's create our target game object. In my environment, I'll just create a new game object called target, and I'll add a sphere as a child of it. Now make sure the collider is on the parent target object and not in the child. Now I'll position it where I want it to be and give it a nice color. Oh, that looks pretty nice. What is this? I thought this was gun tutorial, not golden reflective orb. Yeah, play. Yeah, what is this? Anyways, let's create a script for our target. I'll call it, well, target. And inside it, add iDamageable after mono behavior, and as you can see, we get an error. This error is telling us that we didn't implement iDamageable, and it's right, we didn't. So let's add the damage method that was declared in iDamageable. And now you can see the error's gone. To actually damage something, it needs health, so let's create a float for the health, and I'll default it to 100. Now in the damage method, we need to take in a float for the amount of damage to apply. Back in the interface, add a parameter for it. In this method we simply deduct the damage from our health, check if it's less than or equal to 0, and if it is, destroy the game object. Back in the gun script, remove the debug log, and instead we need to get a reference to a component we hit that implements iDamageable. So let's create a reference of iDamageable and get it using getComponent on the hits transform. Then we apply damage to the damageable if it's not null, again using the null conditional operator, and pass in gun data damage for the damage. That's it. Now back in the editor, if we play, you can see that after shooting the target a bit, it destroys itself. Thanks for watching the video. If you found it helpful, make sure to subscribe to see more content like this. If you need any help, feel free to join my server. See you next video, whenever that is.